The world is moving fast, and so are we. I'm Emma Hurt, here with the stories you need to know. The Trump administration is making another push for peace with Iran, sending two of the president's top envoys to Pakistan this weekend. But Tehran's putting up a major roadblock before any talks can even begin. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has the details. Layla?
Well, Emma, thanks. So Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are heading to Islamabad today, and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is already there. But here's the thing. Iran's already said no direct meetings with the U.S. unless Washington lifts its blockade on Iranian ports first. That's become Tehran's core demand, and they're not budging on it.
So what does Tehran actually mean by that blockade, and why is it such a sticking point?
Look, it's basically an economic stranglehold on Iran's oil exports and imports. The ports are locked down, which means Iran can't sell its oil globally and can't bring in goods it needs. For Tehran, it's not just an economic issue, it's about sovereignty. They're saying the U.S. has to lift this before they'll even sit down for real talks. The Trump administration hasn't said whether they'll move on that demand.
Layla, appreciate it. Thanks for the reporting. Remaining with world news, Russia's overnight drone campaign killed at least 7 people in Ukraine, with the southeastern city of Dnipro hit particularly hard. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has more. Marcus?
Well, Emma, thanks. So what we're seeing here is another round of these relentless Russian drone strikes that have really become a signature of this conflict. At least 5 of those 7 deaths happened in Dnipro, when Russian drones hit a residential apartment building twice. More than 30 people were injured across the city, and that's just in one location. This is part of a broader overnight offensive that hit multiple Ukrainian cities.
Why is Russia focusing so heavily on these apartment blocks rather than military targets?
Look, I think there's a couple things going on here. One, Russia's basically shifted strategy away from trying to take territory. They can't do that effectively right now. So they're going after civilian morale, civilian infrastructure, trying to break the population's will to resist. It's psychological warfare mixed with actual warfare. And honestly, they've got plenty of drones to throw at this problem, so they just keep doing it night after night.
Marcus, appreciate it. And still on this, Mali is reeling from what authorities are calling the most coordinated militant assault in years, with armed groups striking the capital Bamako, the main airport, and northern cities simultaneously early Saturday. Gunfire and explosions have rocked multiple locations across the country as jihadist insurgents and separatist rebels exploit worsening insecurity in the Sahel region. Authorities say they're mobilizing security forces to respond, but the unprecedented scale of these attacks raises serious questions about militant capability and government preparedness in one of West Africa's most unstable nations. A ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is being extended for another 3 weeks, but military clashes continue despite the agreement. The Trump administration is leading negotiations, though it's unclear whether a permanent resolution is even on the table. And Marcus is back with us. Marcus, what's happening on the ground right now?
Well, Emma, it's pretty tense. Even though this ceasefire was supposed to be holding, you've got Hezbollah firing rockets at Israeli communities in the north, and Israel's responding with strikes against militant targets. The military's saying they killed several gunmen who they say were threatening their troops. So this agreement, which is supposed to be keeping the peace, it's already being tested just days in.
So, if they can't even hold a ceasefire for a few weeks, how does Secretary of State Rubio expect to negotiate something permanent?
Look, that's the big question nobody's really answering right now. The administration is leading these ambassador-level talks, but there's no clear indication they're actually pushing for a permanent deal. It looks like they might be satisfied just managing this conflict with repeated short-term extensions. And honestly, that strategy's risky because it leaves both sides free to reposition militarily between ceasefires.
Marcus, appreciate the reporting on this. Also on the U.S. front, Washington is cracking down hard on Chinese companies sneaking oil and chemicals to Iran through shadow trade networks. The Treasury Department just expanded sanctions targeting these covert operations worth billions of dollars, a move coming right before President Trump meets with China's Xi Jinping next month. Watch for Beijing's response and whether this escalates the broader U.S.-China trade tensions even further. Also on the U.S. front, American and Iranian officials sit down for peace talks in Islamabad Saturday aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping lane for global oil. But former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Republican Reporter Michael McCaul both say they're not optimistic a breakthrough is coming. Watch for whether either side signals willingness to compromise on the fundamental issues dividing them. Moving to the markets now. Global energy supplies are shifting dramatically as conflict in Iran reshapes where the world gets its oil and gas. Our finance editor, Sophia Reeves, is here with what it means for your wallet and the broader economy. Sophia?
Well, Emma, what's happening is the U.S. is suddenly positioned to become a major energy exporter, while Europe and Asia are scrambling to figure out alternative suppliers. The conflict in Iran has basically created this opening where American producers can step in and capture market share. But here's the thing, it's also creating a lot of uncertainty about how high oil prices will go.
So what's the risk for investors right now?
Look, according to analysts like Ole Valby at SEB Commodities, there's actually pretty significant danger in betting against energy. A lot of traders are shorting the sector, thinking prices will fall or there will be some quick political deal, but that's risky. The Iran situation doesn't look like it's resolving anytime soon, which means tight supplies and strong energy stocks could keep climbing.
Sophia, appreciate it. Devastating wildfires in Georgia have destroyed over 100 homes and scorched more than 38,000 acres as extreme drought transforms the region into a tinderbox. The stakes for affected communities are enormous. Our technology correspondent, Alex Park, has more on how scientists are measuring nature's most fundamental force and what that could mean for understanding our climate. Alex?
Well, Emma, this is fascinating. Researchers have actually achieved a breakthrough in measuring gravity more reliably than ever before. See, gravity's been this mystery because different experiments keep disagreeing with each other on exactly how strong it is. But this new test is finally giving us consistent measurements that could revolutionize how we understand physics itself.
So how does measuring gravity actually help us predict or prevent disasters like these wildfires?
Look, here's the thing. Better gravity measurements help us build more precise climate models. We can track water movement, atmospheric changes, and weather patterns with way more accuracy. That means forecasters can predict droughts faster and better, which gives communities more time to prepare for fire season.
Alex, appreciate the insight. The Justice Department has wrapped up its criminal investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, closing a probe into the Fed's renovation project with no charges filed. Powell, who oversees the nation's monetary policy and interest rates, can now move forward without the scrutiny that had created uncertainty around his leadership. Watch for how this decision affects market confidence in the Fed as it continues managing inflation and economic policy. Also on the world front, tensions between Washington and its NATO allies are reaching a boiling point over military strategy in the Middle East. Back to Layla.
Thanks, Emma. So what we're seeing here is a reported Pentagon email that's essentially floating the idea of suspending countries like Spain from NATO if they don't get more involved in Iran military operations. The U.S. apparently sees some of these allies as not pulling their weight. But NATO came right back and said, look, there's simply no mechanism to do this. It's not how the alliance works.
What's driving this divide between Washington and Europe on Iran?
Well, here's the thing. Europe's been much more cautious about military escalation. They'd rather see diplomacy and UN frameworks do the heavy lifting. The US, frankly, wants stronger military posturing, and that gap in strategy is creating real friction. If this email is authentic, it suggests Washington's getting frustrated with what it sees as European hesitation, but threatening to kick countries out? That's nuclear in terms of alliance politics.
Layla, appreciate it. Now we turn to our in-depth segment, one story, every angle, the full picture. Palestinians have voted in municipal elections for the first time since the Gaza war began. A moment that sounds procedural, but carries enormous weight for the future of Palestinian governance, the Trump peace framework, and the question of who actually speaks for Palestinians right now. The vote took place in the occupied West Bank, and for the first time since Hamas took control in 2007 in part of the Gaza Strip. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Emma. Good to be here. Look, the headline fact here is that this is the first vote in any part of Gaza in nearly 20 years, and it happened in tents and bombed-out buildings in Deir al-Balah. That tells you everything about the conditions. Hamas didn't field a party slate, but here's what's important. Hamas-affiliated candidates did appear on individual lists, which means this vote is also a live test of Islamist support at the grass line. The security dimension can't be ignored either. The IDF arrested a Palestinian Islamic Jihad battalion commander in Jenin on the same day. That's not a coincidence of timing. That's a reminder of who controls the operating environment for Palestinian politics.
Sophia, from your perspective, what's the broader significance when you look at what this vote is actually supposed to achieve?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a vote that's doing two different jobs at once, and they're in tension with each other. On one level, it's a genuine local governance exercise. Water, roads, electricity, that stuff matters enormously for people living under occupation or in a war zone. But on the other level, it's clearly tied to the Trump administration's reform conditions for any Gaza reconstruction framework. And that's where I'd be cautious. When elections become primarily a diplomatic performance, a box to tick for external actors, they tend not to generate the legitimacy they're supposed to. Former French Ambassador Besancenot said high turnout would give this credibility to Palestinian sovereignty. Low turnout, which is what we got, does the opposite.
Marcus, final thought, realistically, where does this go?
My assessment is that the most likely outcome here is what I'd call a checked box rather than a mandate. Fatah ran essentially uncontested, no real opposition field. The PA gets to point to an election and satisfy the reform checklist, but Hamas will say, look, we stayed out, we weren't beaten. And in Gaza, that framing will resonate with people. The dangerous scenario is that low turnout in Deir al-Balah gets read internationally as a rebuke of the PA, and Hamas uses that to reinforce its claim to represent Gazan opinion. That doesn't make reconstruction easier, it makes it harder. I don't think this vote closes the legitimacy gap. I think it papers over it.
Thank you both. Marcus, Sophia, really valuable perspective on what's a genuinely complex moment. We'll continue to follow the results as they come in. The United States and Iran are technically in the same city for peace talks, yet still refusing to sit in the same room. And that single fact tells you almost everything you need to know about where this war stands right now. Tehran is demanding the lifting of a U.S. port blockade before any direct diplomacy can begin, while American envoys Witkoff and Kushner touch down in Islamabad with their mandate, and apparently not much more. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Emma. And look, I think the port blockade issue is really the heart of this story. It's not a side condition. It's the whole ballgame right now. Iran's economy runs on maritime trade, and Washington knows that lifting that pressure before talks even start means giving up one of its most powerful pieces of leverage essentially for free. From a strategic standpoint, the U.S. position is defensible. You don't surrender your strongest card before you've sat down. But here's what worries me. The longer that blockade stays in place, the more Iran's hardliners can frame every economic hardship domestically as American aggression, which actually makes a deal harder to reach over time, not easier. And the foreign affairs analysis on China's advantage here is something I keep coming back to. Trump meets in next month, and every day this drags on is a day Beijing gets to say, look at American overextension.
James, from your perspective, what does it tell us that Rubio isn't even in the room, that this has been handed to Witkoff and Kushner?
Well, it tells us quite a lot, honestly. Rubio is wearing two hats. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, and apparently the NSA role is winning. What that signals geopolitically is that Trump has essentially privatized his Iran diplomacy, which can work. It's worked in small doses before, but it also means there's no institutional State Department architecture backing these talks up. And to add to what Sophia said about China, I think the foreign affairs framing is exactly right. This isn't just a Middle East war anymore. It's a test of American strategic coherence ahead of a really consequential moment with Beijing. The worst-case scenario, and it's not unlikely, is that talks collapse, Iran activates its proxy networks more aggressively, and Washington ends up fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously while she watches from a position of strength.
Sophia, final thought. Where does this actually go from here?
My assessment is we're heading for the middle scenario, honestly. Direct talks don't happen this weekend. Pakistan keeps playing the intermediary role, and you get some slow confidence building, maybe a partial easing on the blockade framed as a humanitarian gesture that gives both sides political cover. It won't be clean, and it won't be fast. The Korean War armistice took 2 years after the fighting stalled, and I don't think anyone in Washington or Tehran has genuinely reckoned with that kind of timeline yet. What concerns me most is that the window to get ahead of the China dynamic is closing, and neither side seems in enough pain right now to make the concessions a real deal would require.
Thank you both. Sophia, James, really valuable perspective. Appreciate it. The world keeps turning, and so do we. I'm Emma Hurt. Thanks for joining us. See you at the next update.